Hey there, it's Katie Kindle from Kitchen Stewardship, and I am making my most favorite soup ever. This is going to be a cream of potato vegetable soup, and I'm showing you this today because our theme at Kitchen Stewardship this week is to learn a recipe by heart. And this is, I think, a really good one. It's very simple and it's very versatile. You can do a cream of vegetable soup with pretty much any veggies you have on hand. So what I've got in here is a couple tablespoons of butter, and I've been sauteing a portion of a leek all chopped up. And at this point you can do any of the kind of allium family. So a leek, an onion, we're going to add some garlic in a minute. Or you can skip it, because really, especially like a white onion is going to add quite a bit of flavor. It's going to change the whole soup completely differently. So I've got my garlic chopped here, and I'm going to throw that in. It's best to just saute garlic for like the last minute of your cooking. So we'll stir that around, and then we're going to add all of the more hearty vegetables. So my potatoes, I happen to have some turnips on hand today, so I'm throwing those in. If I had any other root vegetables like carrots, which I often use but I'm choosing not to today, or if I wanted to do any sweet potato or squash or anything like that, I would put those in at this time. There, so now I can smell the garlic going on, and at that point, now I'm going to be finished sauteing. So here comes the turnips and potatoes, and this is about 4 medium potatoes. And I just happen to have 4 little turnips on hand. They're just a bonus today. And I chose not to peel. You certainly can peel your potatoes. That's completely your preference. Just a minute, Jen. And then once the potatoes go in, I'm going to pour in, this is a quart or 4 cups of chicken stock. And I'm oh, it's nice. Look at that gelatin. You see that coming out? How much does that rock? That's right. So now I can crank up the heat to high because I just want to get this up to a boil. And I'm gonna pour in the whole jar, because what I'm going to do here is a little one-pot cheat of a sort. I've got my steamer basket set up with the chopped broccoli in it. And so I'm going to try to steam that over the potatoes, which are cooking in the stock. So I've got a little rest for the steamer basket, put the steamer basket in there, and eventually that stock will get up to a boil, and we'll get the lid on, there it is, and just let that steam for about 5 to 7 minutes and let those potatoes cook and everything, and then we'll come back and add some of the softer veggies and finish up our cream sauce. We are back with our cream of potato vegetable. And it's actually been cooking on really low quite a while because I had to go get kids from the bus stop and do afternoon snack and all that. And that's one lovely thing about this kind of meal is you can just kind of turn it down and let it be. The broccoli is well cooked, and actually it got in the chicken broth a little bit. That's why I was hesitating when I was pouring the chicken broth in. And I'm just going to carefully dump the broccoli in. Because I didn't want the chicken broth to get above the potatoes, and I ended up doing it anyway. I just couldn't tell how full it was going to get because when it was all gelatin. So one thing I neglected to mention when I started this is that this is going to be, this is going to be the gluten-free version of the cream sauce. So if you were using wheat flour, you would put it in with the fat, and mix it all around with the leeks and the garlic and the melted butter. And I might even add another tablespoon of melted butter at that point, just to make sure that the flour has something to kind of glom onto. So at this point, we're going to move on with the recipe. Because I'm using homemade chicken stock, I know I need a lot of salt. Just everything falls flat if you don't have enough salt. So that was a scant tablespoon. And we like pepper in our house, so I'm doing about a teaspoon of pepper. And I can get that, I really can add that in at any time. And then I'm going to do the kind of the thickening part and adding we're going to get the next tier of stuff. So these are frozen green beans that don't really need that much cooking. I'll just get those in there, and then I'm going to add most of my 4 cups of milk. If you get 3 cups, if you get 4.5 cups, it's not going to matter all that much. So I'm just kind of eyeing it up. And then my last bit of milk is going to go into what I call my starch jar. About that much. Along with about 3 tablespoons of arrowroot starch. And again, this is how I choose to make a gluten-free cream sauce or milk sauce or a roux bechamel. If you were using flour, you could actually do it this way. Anytime you add starch or flour to a boiling liquid, you got to make sure that it's mixed with cold liquid. So I've got this cranked up to high in an attempt to get the milk to come up to a boil, because I do want it boiling before I get the starch in. But the best way, if you're using flour, there's a little bit of a floury taste or flavor to it. So the best time to add the flour is in the fat, and then you cook out the floury flavor. So I'm waiting on a couple things. I'm waiting on my herbs. So I want to add those right at the end to keep the fullest flavor. And then I'm just waiting on my kale because again, greens can get kind of slimy if they get overcooked. So those are the very last things I'll put in. But this is going to need a minute or 2 or 3 to get up to temperature. And then I'll show you how to finish it off. Well, I was alerted that the milk had come to a boil by the sizzling as I boiled it over, which is totally normal for me. I hadn't even cut my kale yet, so I thought I would chat a little bit about what kinds of vegetables I like to put in this cream of vegetable soup and when I add them, just so that you kind of have an idea. Again, this is a recipe that I make without a recipe, which I love because I'm getting to the point where I'm so scattered, I'll forget to get the recipe, and then it takes me like an extra 5 minutes to get started when I'm under the gun and really need to get dinner going. So I love that about this soup. I can use any vegetables I have on hand. Again, I put kind of the heartier ones in at the beginning, so potatoes, carrots, more like starchy, woody things. Sometimes I steam the broccoli or cauliflower, just because of goitrogens and such like that. Frozen vegetables get plunked in with the milk. So any frozen veggies, if you want this to be super simple, use some chopped potatoes or a bag of frozen like hash browns where the only ingredient is potatoes, and a bag of frozen veggies, and call it dinner. You can avoid all the nasty stuff that's in commercial soups and be just about as quick and easy and have a really big pot of soup with lots of leftovers. And this freezes fine as well. So I'm adding the kale here at the end. Zucchini is another really easy and nice option here. So I said carrots and green beans are pretty typical. I'll use broccoli and cauliflower sometimes. If you can handle a little sweet, my husband does not, so I don't use sweet potatoes or squash, but you certainly could just cube those up and add them in. So look at that, immediately the kale is just a beautiful green. I love that. And again, if you're using wheat flour, you do add that in with the fat, and I explain that in the post in the recipe and in Better Than a Box, the ebook. So the spices I'm choosing to use today are about a teaspoon of dried dill. I like dill a lot. And then about a tablespoon of dried parsley. Pretty simple, not a lot of seasoning in this soup. And I've got about a quart of milk and a quart of chicken broth in there as far as the liquid. I often season this with marjoram. It's a really nice light herb and good for a cream sauce. Okay, so now we've got everything that goes in the soup except the thickener. And so it's just milk and broth, and it's really thin. I'm cranking up the heat a little bit just to remind it that it was boiling before I added that kale. And then I've got 3 tablespoons of arrowroot starch in this jar with some cold milk, and I shake that up, or you can whisk it up in a measuring cup or whatever you want to do. Okay, I do see some bubbles on the side. You do want to have it nice and hot when you pour in the starch and milk mixture. If you, let's say you forget and you pour in all your milk and you don't have any other milk in the house, because I know that's happening to somebody, just use water. Just use a little bit of cold water, 1/4 cup or a cup. You can add this all at once. I'm just kind of stirring it as I go. And within about a minute or 2, once the temperature comes back up to a boil, that'll thicken right up. It'd be nice if it would go really quickly so that you could see it. This soup reheats wonderfully. It'll keep for a week, no problem, in the fridge. You can totally switch it up, you know. You can take the potatoes out, or take half the potatoes out, double the broccoli, add some cheese, and you've got a cheesy broccoli soup. Throw in some ham and corn, and you've got a cheesy ham and corn chowder. I mean, you can do anything once you know this basic recipe and kind of the proportions. For a basic cream sauce, it's 1 tablespoon fat, 1 tablespoon flour or starch, and 1 cup of milk or chicken broth or liquid of some kind. And then to thicken it up, you just increase the ratio of the starch. So if I was using flour with this, I would use at least 6 tablespoons. Again, I used 3 with arrowroot starch. Arrowroot starch does thicken up a little more. And you know, and if I decide that it's not thick enough, I'll just add a little more starch and a little more cold milk to my jar and pour that in and see what happens. But it's starting to thicken up. I don't know if you can even tell. You can just tell the way that it's stirring on the edges. It's starting to thicken up a little bit. You could make this into a really kind of Mexican soup by adding peppers. Peppers are, you know, you can switch out vegetables all day long and it's pretty much going to taste the same until you start messing with the onions and the peppers. Those are 2 things that will really change the flavor. You can do any green you want, even cabbage. Shredded up goes fine in this soup. Any vegetable you've got hanging around. Beets would probably make it pink. That might be the only vegetable I would hesitate on. Anyway, if I use peppers, you might want to take the gentle herbs out and use like a cumin or a chili powder and throw in some tomatoes and do like a Mexican salsa based kind of thing. Okay, so this has thickened up a little bit. I use a ladle here. The ladle you can tell a little better. It's not a very thick soup right now. I could double that arrowroot starch again, and it would be the equivalent of more like 3/4 cup to a cup of wheat flour, and then that would be really pretty thick, more like a condensed soup out of a can. But I kind of like this. It's good enough to dip your bread or your biscuit into, but then it's not going to totally burn when I reheat it. Just add a little milk on the reheat. So that's my favorite cream of potato vegetable soup. I challenge you this week to learn how to cook one recipe without a recipe, or choose one and, you know, try to make it once a week for the next couple of weeks, something that your family would really like, and that's pretty easy. And then it's just exhilarating in the kitchen to be able to cook without a recipe. I love it. And I'm not all that good in the kitchen, but this kind of thing makes me feel like I know what I'm doing. So definitely check out the recipe at kitchenstewardship.com and have a good dinner.